For those of you who haven't met me before, my name's Carly Michael, and as Chris mentioned, I'm part of the family here. I'm 5th generation. Our business is been operating since 1916, so we're 103 years old. And there's 2 generations of Michaels currently working in the building, about 4 family members. Me and my brother's the marketing manager, my dad, he's the managing director. My mum also works here in accounts. And I've been working here since on and off my whole life. Even when I was about 8 years old, I used to come in and we used to put little sticker barcodes on the film, and I used to put the film away, and I used to make sure they're all lined up the same way. And then I worked when I was 16. I worked in the lab. Does anyone remember this building before we renovated? Yeah, a few head nods. Okay, so actually the room we're in was basically the whole building, but a floor above and a floor below. And the lab was actually probably where you guys are sitting. And I used to come in on Sundays, or I loved working in the lab, and I used to come on Sundays because the lab was closed and I wanted to get us ahead. So I loved working in the lab. I worked in the camera department when I was 19, selling cameras for about a year. And then I left, I went and studied. I studied neuroscience at Monash University for 4 years. And then after that, I studied photography at RMIT. And then after I studied photography, I decided to work here. First on a temporary basis. I started in the imaging department on the front counter there, taking in orders and giving orders back. And then eventually I actually really liked it, and I became the manager of that department, or of that section, the customer service. Then I moved to the lab and learned how to do all the production. And then I became the manager of the lab, and then the whole department, and et cetera, et cetera. So I've been working in the imaging department since 2011. So it's about 8 years now, and I've loved it. And we actually do a lot in this department. Lately, people have been calling it the analog department, but that's technically incorrect. We do a huge amount of analog processes. We develop a lot of film, and I've been around in this film resurgence, which really kicked off in 2014, 2015, where we've seen 4 times the amount of film that we were processing back when I started in 2011. So, in the imaging department, we do, as I've mentioned, film processing. We do a lot of scanning and a lot of printing. And that's what this talk's going to be about: develop, print, and scan. And if you've ever heard of, if you've actually ever developed film, hopefully you would have been asked, do you want prints and scans with that? And I'm really going to go into why we offer all of those options. Now, September is Save Your Photos Month. It started off in 2014 in America, and it started by a group called the Association of Professional Photo Organisers, who launched this day in response to a few natural disasters that had happened. And it's a group of people who go and help people organise their photos so that they can find their photos and save them. And this is about creating awareness for imagery and photos and their long-term, longevity. And it's something I'm really passionate about. This is the 2nd year in a row that we're talking about Save Your Photos. Probably when you walked up the stairs, you would have seen, hopefully, a big wall that said, have you printed your photos aren't going to last. And I'll show you that campaign shortly. But I go around internationally. I go to a conference every year with other independent photo lab owners. And I've been leading this conversation. And actually, I was just telling the guys before we came in, when we had this conversation with the group in March this year, we all sat down and we thought, is it even worth us having this conversation about printing photos and really, like, you know, I really want billboards all around cities, and like I think this is a really huge societal issue. But before we kind of go down that path and look for marketing like assistance and from the big guys, we really went through a discussion of, is this really even important? And the answer was a resounding yes. And what people were saying, because this conference was in Las Vegas, you know, people were saying, I just got off the plane and I saw like billboards for peanut butter and toilet paper and toothpaste and all this stuff, gambling and whatever. But like nothing, but photos are our life. Like that's, you know, when your house burns down, or, you know, you take your photos, that's what you go for. Or when you know, at the most important moments in your life, when you have a baby, when you get married, like that's what you document that day with photos. Photos are so important to us, and we're going to talk about the value of photos. So we had this like overwhelming agreement that photos are like, we need to take action and continue this conversation and build this campaign and try and inspire the people who can really help get this message out there in the world. So thank you for coming, because this is one step on the path. And what I want to do, as I told you before, is this talk is going to be about develop, scan and print. And so we'll start with the developing, and what I'm alluding to is talking about film. And film is alive. Has anyone not noticed that film is alive? It's actually unbelievable. In the last 4 years, as I said, it's like we're doing 4 times the amount of film in the lab. We're literally processing hundreds of rolls of film every day in our lab. And it's interesting because most of the people who are shooting film are new to film. There's a lot of young people who weren't born in an era where there was film, and they're discovering it for the first time, and it's beautiful because these are people who have grown up in a digital, fast-paced world that's like isolating and like, yeah, it's full on. We all know that. We all know the fast-paced world that we're living in. That's the like consumer. It's a real taking world, and what film allows them to do is to become tactile, to become aware of their environment, to slow down, to consider what's in front of them, to understand this is expensive, you know. So I'm going to like be really careful with what I take photos of and choose the film carefully and get interested in the theory behind it. So it's a really amazing phenomenon. The downside of this is that, well, I'll just, sorry. We have this issue where people are not collecting the actual negatives, and we've actually, over the last 6 or 7 years, accumulated about 6,000 uncollected orders. We have like 50-litre containers. We've got about 55 of them full of orders. So we've gone through this whole process of letting people know you need to come and collect your film or we're going to dispose of it. We can't hold it any longer. And you can get some stats on who these people are, and we discovered that 90% of the people who haven't collected their film are under the age of 25. So what happens is they get their film developed, we send them scans, and that's all they're interested in that digital file. They're not even, most of them aren't aware that there are actually negatives. So we've changed how we communicate with people. We ask them, you know, are you going to come and collect? We tell them about why it's important. Most of them actually really don't care, but they're interested. They're still, what's beautiful is they're still interested in the process, and I think that's still really magical. But there are still a lot of people shooting film who aren't under the age of 25. My favourite reason is a digital detox, which I alluded to before. Like, you know, people who are returning to film to just to simply slow down and become more tactile. It's fun, it's retro, it has a nostalgia and an aesthetic around it. There's a lot of commercial photography moving to film. A lot of people in the fashion industry are shooting film, again, because there's a different aesthetic to it. And my favourite is that you can hold it, it's tangible, it exists in the third dimension. So we have here at Michael's, we're really proud of the developing, our film developing services. We have 3 dip and dunk film processors. There's 2 ways you can process film. We have a dip and dunk, and I've written their budget, but it's we have a budget service which uses a roller transport, and I'm going to go through the differences between them. These are pictures of from our lab. On the left-hand side, we have our C41 dip and dunk film processor. Basically, we have a dark room. It's probably about double the size of this stage. And it has 3 machines, like the left-hand side, like the machine on the left. Our E6 is about double the size of the C41. And what actually happens is we take the film in complete darkness into the darkroom. There's no red light when you're working with film, that's only applicable for paper. And we take the film out in the canister or from the backing paper, and in complete darkness we remove it from the canister and we hang it on these racks up here. And we clip them. So if it's 120, it's clipped at the top with a weight at the bottom, and 35mm gets wrapped over the hook with a weight at the bottom, so it keeps it taut. Otherwise it actually curls. And then what happens is we've got these open tanks, and the film gets quite literally dipped into each tank. So it kind of starts on this side of the machine, and the racks get taken by a series of gantries, and the film goes down into, like, the developer, for example. It goes up, that moves to the next tank, which might be a wash tank. Then it goes up, and then it goes to a stop bath, and then a fixer, etc. So the film actually doesn't come in touch. It doesn't come in touch with any machinery at any time. Which ultimately, like, virtually takes away any possibility of it being scratched during the process. It also means that the film is processed evenly, so the entire roll is in the developer, and then the entire roll gets moved to the stop bath, and the entire roll goes to the fixer, etc. And this is different to the roller transport, and I'll go through how that works in a minute. The other thing about these machines is that it has a computer on the other end, and we program the computer and tell it exactly what's on each rack. So it might know that on this rack we've got 3 rolls of 120, and on this rack we might have 2 rolls of 36 exposures and 2 rolls of 24. So the machine calculates the precise amount of developer that's required to develop the film per square metre in that particular rack, and then it replenishes it the exact same amount that's been used during the processing of those particular rolls. So it's always a really fresh process. And really clean. So what we've got over here in the middle, this is some sheets of 8x10. So we can process 4x5, 5x7, 8x10. We can do disc film. Does anyone remember disc film? So like these, they're about this big, and about, I think it's 12 or 14 exposures. Because it goes in these open tanks, we've designed like a clip, something like this, and it actually gets clipped and taken into the different tanks. So with the dip and dunk, we've got that opportunity. We do APS film, 127, 126, Minox, like anything that's available. In the E6 we can do, I think, up to 16x24, because it's a really big machine. And then what happens is Well, actually, just so you're aware that this is actually the fixer here, so that's why we've been able to turn on the lights. But otherwise, it's all done in complete darkness. In the end, it gets dropped. There's like a hole here, and it gets dropped and into this section, and then goes into a dryer, and it dries for about 30 minutes before it comes out the other end. So the dip and dunk process is about, for C41, it's 45 minutes from start to end. So with this type of process, you can't do 1 hour. It's not possible. A 1 hour is with the roller transport. It's a much faster process. And on the right-hand side, we've got some rolls of E6 that have come out of the processor, and you can see there's some clips here at the bottom. So then what our technicians will do is they'll remove the clips and then take it onto wherever its next station is, whether it's for scanning, sleeving. We do actually still do slide mounting. There aren't many places in the world who do that. So we've got about 10 years supply of slide mounts, so we're really lucky. The other thing actually we do that people were asking us for years, can we produce slides from digital files? You'd be surprised, once a week someone asked us for years, and then finally we worked out how to do it. It's not an archival process, but for most people it's often for like art projects, and they don't need it to last a lifetime. But we can absolutely take a digital file and create a slide for people. So on the left-hand side, this is just a little quick video. This is from my Instagram feed. Oh, it's not working. Oh no, unable to play. Okay, let's see if this one works. This was a little bit of fun. I've got an ad up on Instagram at the moment. Just a little stop motion to talk about our budget processor. So on the right-hand side, this is what is known as a mini lab, or a roller transport film processor, and this is the type of machine that you'll use if you're using a 1 hour photo lab. So what happens is the film is removed from its the tongue of the film is removed from the canister, and it's attached to a plastic a leader card, and that card it actually pulls the film out of the canister, and it travels up and down through a series of rollers up and down the machine, and in here is all the chemicals. So what happens is the film actually, this is film, you can't really see it very well on the projector, but it comes out on the other side. It takes about 14 minutes from start to end. And so the distinct differences between that type of processor and the dip and dunk is that this one, in using the roller transport, the film comes in contact with machinery at all times. So it has a higher risk of damage if there's a jam for some reason, if there's some residue, often from a previous roll of film. It might have been to the beach and might have had sand, so it can get left in the machines, then the next roll that comes past could end up with a scratch. The film itself can be inside a number of different chemical baths at different times, at different lengths of the film. So it doesn't have even processing. And the other thing is, because it's coming into machinery, into contact with machinery, it generates static. So you can actually get exposures caused by static. So it's a really good way if you want to cheap up. We make it a cheap option if you ask for budget processing. We run the machine only a couple times a week, so we do a 7-day turnaround. But it's about half the price of the dip and dunk. But they've got like fundamental quality differences. So if you really care about your film, we highly recommend using the dip and dunk. That's our main process. We also are unique in that we run control strips through all our machines every time we develop film. So a control strip is a short amount of film that's been pre-exposed to certain density levels. So what happens is before we run the machines each day, including the roller transport, we run a control strip, and we check it using a densitometer, which will measure the blackest black to see if it really is as black as it should be, or if the chemistry isn't performing well. We'll know from these measurements. The clear, like the areas where there shouldn't be any, it should be completely clear. Is it actually as clear as it's meant to be? And that way we can determine if there's an issue with the chemistry, if it's contaminated, if it's fresh, if it's running consistently each day. We can tell scientifically. And we do have to import some of the control strips from overseas because there's not enough demand in Australia, specifically for the E6 and the black and white. So we are very confident in the quality of our processing, and if it's not operating correctly, we will not run our machine until we determine the source. So the next section is scanning, and scanning is really the process of converting something that's analog into digital. And that's probably my favourite part of working in the lab. Like, I feel like I'm really in the flux between the analog and the digital space, where actually different forms of analog, like developing film is like an alchemical process. It's chemistry, it's magic. So we're always fluctuating between different states. So I wanted to just pull out, this is some old media of ours. If you can notice, I don't know if you can see it from the back, but this is a telephone number from the 90s because it's missing the 9 in front of our phone number. But as I said, we've been here 100 plus years, and we've really been in the inside the transformation from analog to digital and all the different phases that's taken as well. So, we were scanning in the city back in the 1990s. This is actually from 1994, I can read that. And so we've been doing these digital imaging services for quite some time, even these free seminars. They've been going back since the 90s. But we do photo restoration, we still do that. We sell digital cameras, we print digital photos, etc. Just thought it was interesting, and I really liked the old, this was state of the art at the time, the CRT monitors and whatever's going on down there. This I love. This is from 2000, and this was actually from an article in a retailing magazine, and this was a picture inside our lab at the time, and I am sure that this is literally where I'm standing now, or as I said, over there. That's what I remember when I was 16, which actually would have been exactly this time. That's how the lab looked. So what I love about this article is this ad here, which was it wasn't for us specifically, but it was for compact flash memory cards from the 1990, and this one here says 128 megabytes for $458, right? It's pretty extraordinary. That was 18 years ago. So the technology moves quickly, and we're so used to it that we don't quite realise how quickly we've moved, but we've been right there in amongst it, and it's pretty extraordinary. So at Michael's, we can digitise or scan anything, including negatives, positives, like mounted slides, glass plate negatives, 120 mounted slides, family albums we can digitise. Like, people bring us collections. We deal a lot with people's estates, even old cameras that people will go through their parents' estates and just bring in the camera gear to us. So we get a lot of family relics. Shoe boxes full of prints. We have a service called a shoebox scan because of that. It's designed for hundreds of photos, a cheaper version of scanning, but we can also scan using our flatbed scanner, which We scan one by one, and we'll do a dust and scratch removal, and we will set the levels, set the black point and the white point, and a few other things which won't come with the shoebox scan. We do restorations. We print on. I'll get to printing soon. But with restorations, I highly recommend then printing it on fine art archival paper. So we can, and then framing it. We can do the whole kit and caboodle. And we also offer scanning at different resolutions, because depending on what you're going to be doing with it, you might only need a small file, or you might need a large file if you're going to be printing large, or if you're going to do cropping or editing. So we can handle all of that. Here at Michael's. This was another old one I found. It's hard to see, but I'm pretty sure this was, it says, as we approach the year 2000s, this is late 1990s, and these were, the different digital devices that ended up in the computer that then you could output. So we have a projector, floppy disks, a CD burner with a CD-ROM, a printer, the World Wide Web, an envelope to send it in the mail. So it's so we're progressing, and as I said, we've been right there in the middle of it. So when we're talking about scanning and having digital files, we do end up with a problem. We're in 2019, approaching 2020. And the problem is we're actually now drowning in photos. I started speaking publicly about this topic in 2015, and at that time I was reporting over 1.5 million new photos every day were shared on Facebook, WhatsApp and Snapchat. But that number has just exploded. 4 years later, the statistics are even more staggering. 574,000 photos uploaded to Snapchat and Instagram every minute, and I actually think that's still dated data, maybe like 9 months ago. 300 million photos uploaded daily to Facebook, 1.2 trillion photos taken in 2017, 4.7 trillion photos stored digitally. Like, it's crazy. So, and I even, dare to ask you guys how many photos you've got sitting on your camera roll, on your own phone, let alone all the other places. So it's something to have a look at. What is your contribution to these statistics? Would any of you think you've got more than 2,000 photos on your phone? Yeah, a few hands. Yeah, it's a lot of photos. If you lost your phone, just have a think about what photos would actually impact you the most. If you actually didn't have access to your phone. I know we have iCloud. If you're on the Apple system, and Google Photos on Gmail, on the Google system. So we are in a better position than we were, but we are still at the helm of the big guys. We've passed all our photos over to Apple, or we've passed all our photos over to Google. And there's things to be wary of. So, how important are photos to you? Can I see a show of hands? I'm going to give you 4 options, okay? And put your hand up, depending on which one resonates the most to you. How important are photos to you? There's 4 options: not very, somewhat, very, or extremely. So, how important photos to you? Not very important? Show of hands? No takers? Somewhat important to you? Still no one? Photos are very important to you? Yeah, okay, about half. And extremely important to you? A bit more than half. Okay, thank you. Now, show of hands, when was the last time you printed your photos? The options are in the last month, 6 months ago, up to 12 months ago, up to 2 years ago, or I don't remember the last time I printed. So we'll start with in the last month. How many of you printed in the last month? Wow, that's awesome. It's about a third of you. Great. What about in the past 6 months? Awesome. Okay, so I'd say about 20%. Last 12 months? Great. We had about 4 or 5 hands there. Last 2 years? Great. Another 3 hands. And don't remember the last time I printed? 1. Great. And I do want to just acknowledge that a lot of the data, there's a big shift in the attitudes or the behaviours of the millennials who haven't grown up with the experience of printing photos, and people of older generations. And I also want to acknowledge there aren't many millennials in the room right now. So our source, our pool here is weighted against the millennials. But, your wedding, your first baby, your child's graduation day, life has so many moments that are so valuable that you can't even think about losing them. But our relationship with the photos of these events has become so flippant as a society, so despondent in the digital age. What we can probably agree is that in these critical moments, that's when the true importance of these images comes to light. So during natural disasters, people take their family photo albums as some of their few possessions that they take. We mentioned that earlier. And from my experience at the imaging counter, I get heaps of mothers with kids frantically printing the second child's photos because something happened to the images of the first child and they lost them. So this was, Canon Australia reports that 2/3 of photographers they surveyed said that they'd lost image files due to the damage or failure of physical technology. Now I'll go through this part a bit quickly. Vint Cerf, he created the internet in the late... He was one of the internet pioneers and is currently the vice president of Google worldwide. He has coined the term the digital dark age, which he has described. He says we've currently entered, that the future generations will have little or no record of the 21st century during this digital dark age. And he thinks there's 2 threats to images which exist only as digital files. The first threat is obsolescence and the second threat is bit rot. Now bit rot is the phenomena of actually the files made up of bits, megabits, megabytes, etc. The bits actually over time can rot and lose their integrity, especially on flash drives if they're not powered up often enough. But something that we'll probably be more familiar with is obsolescence. So, remember a CD drive? Right, it's not that long ago. Can you still buy a computer that has a CD drive? Nowadays you can't even get one with a USB. The new Macs have a USB-C as their only input or output. Depending on who you ask, life expectancy of a CD is between 2 to 200 years. Hard drives, flash, cloud, they also have lives stated to not last very long. So I've got hard drives, it's missing it there. Hard drives are about quoted to be about 5 to 7 years life. That's with the moving parts. Flash drives about 5 to 10 years. Also, they're easy to lose and small. Cloud, though it's convenient, you can risk losing data due to ownership and privacy issues, and in the end they're also stored on computers just somewhere where you can't see them. So they're also subject to the risks. There's definitely backup strategies, but I've had they're subject to risks which may still become apparent over time. What's really important is to save data on media that will be readable in the future, but also to use file formats that will be accessible in the future. That still can be tricky. We were just having a conversation before about DNG files, Adobe's RAW file, which they encourage, it's marketed as a universal file. So each camera company has its own unique proprietary RAW file, and when you bring it into Adobe software, you can convert it into a digital negative file. A few years ago, when I started talking about this issue, Capture One, which is another editing software, wouldn't accept DNG files. Nowadays, they will work with DNG files if the camera has captured the file as a DNG, because cameras can do that now. But if it's been created from an Adobe suite, it works with limitations. And that's coming from, we've got Adobe who's trying to dominate the market. As we all know, you need a subscription to use their services. So what happens if Adobe doesn't exist anymore one day and all your files are in DNG? So there's a lot of, what happens if your files are on a floppy disk, or, and you can't find a floppy disk? Remember zip disks? And XCD cards, and there's heaps of them that have just become obsolete. Even VCRs and VHS tapes. VCRs were they stopped making them a few years ago. Obsolescence is something really to take into account. So let's get on to the print side. Now, though we're taking tons of photos, I know in this room there are people who are printing, but out there in the world, a lot of people, I would say most people, aren't printing their photos. And, it's not our fault. When we went from analog to digital, we lost the prompt to print, right? In the past, you would have your film and we could develop it, but you'd end up with a negative. So the only way you could see your photos was to actually print them. Nowadays, we don't need that. We already have access to the file or the image. So the reason for us to print, the necessity is gone. And nowadays, really, the value of a print is from an image is when you take it and then when you need it. But in the middle, an image has barely any value. So the question is, will more family photos survive from your grandmother's lifetime than from yours? My grandmother survived World War II with photos of her family stuffed inside her shoe, and that's all we have from before the 1940s of our family, because the photos were printed. These are some statistics taken from about 2 years ago from America. 42% of people I'll give you more context. There's 1,500 consumers in 2015 surveyed by the Professional Photographers Association of America. They're saying 42% of people between the ages of 30 and 44 will likely look back and wonder where photos of their childhood, holiday get-togethers, relatives and friends have gone decades from now. 67% report that they store their photos solely on a computer or phone. Statistics show that 53% of consumers have not printed a photo in more than 12 months. 70% don't have photo albums, and 42% no longer print photos at all. So that's ages 44 to 30, and these are the people with kids. And it really doesn't have to be that way. Printing the photos will guarantee that the photos will last, especially if they're printed with the modern technology archival paper. Now, this is a campaign that we've just launched. This is on Instagram. Let's see if this works. All this talk about the end of the world, and we're preparing for the digital dark age. Digital files don't always stand the test of time. Hard drives crash. USBs get lost. It's hard enough just to find a computer with a CD reader. Don't be part of a lost generation. Save your photos. Print your photos today. So, prints will stand the test of time. There are more images being captured than ever before, but print numbers continue to decline. And it's also because the value of images declines as well. We're taking more photos than we ever have, but how many of them are really important? How many of them are really worth keeping? How overwhelming is it to look back at your photos at the end of the day after you've taken hundreds? Whether it's on your phone or your computer, on your camera. Sorry, it's a serious issue, but if we don't address it and don't actually start to take action, we are actually going to have a generation that's not going to be remembered. So thank you for coming. We've given you a 50% voucher, and now we've done this before. We've given a 50% printing voucher, and not many people took it up. So I'm curious about what your thoughts are. What's in the way of you printing? Right, that's my next journey to really I know what's in the way is the prompt is gone, but I'm determined to find a solution, a really easy way to have people print their photos and safeguard their futures. So feel free to come and have a chat with me. Thank you for coming, and spread the word. Save your photos. Of course. Thank you.